Hey everybody, sorry I didn't get the video up sooner. I've had some serious trouble with my back sitting for long periods of time, and I'm obviously then having trouble being at my computer, so my apologies. I was able to speak to a few of you and answer some questions via Zoom, but I just wanted to sort of go over um, the map just for the people who had trouble logging in or whatever. So that first map, all I need from you is for you to sort of show me how you see the world right now. And you're going to do that by picking 8 to 10 concepts that are related to this class. You could pick them, from the course outline. Maybe you want to talk about reproductive health, or maybe just abortion, or maybe sexual assault, or gender, or violence in general. Um, Things that you are curious about, that you have strong feelings about, that you want to know more about, that you think we're going to learn about, and give me, a tiny description, couple bullet points sort of thing, about how you understand that right now. So the example I was giving in class and with the people I was speaking to is like, let's say you choose to put abortion on there. Maybe you're going to say raised in a Catholic household. My faith says abortion is wrong. I think that women should have access to abortion, and I feel, torn because my beliefs and my faith, are at odds. Something like that. Just a quick little, so then I have an idea about, okay, where you're at with that. Um, in the middle of your map, you're going to have yourself. So your name, and then a few things about you that you think are really significant about your own identity that impact how you understand the world, right? So maybe you are the first person to go to university in your family. Maybe you are a single parent. Maybe you were a teenage parent. Maybe you have a really strong faith background that would prohibit discussions of the kind we're going to have in this class, but you're really curious anyway. Maybe you grew up in poverty. Um, Maybe how you identify in terms of gender is really important to you, or you think that not only might it be important to you, but that it impacts how you understand the world around you. So you want to give me a few of those so that as you go through these map assignments, you and I can both sort of look at those key things about you that you've chosen to highlight and see how they impact how you're understanding this stuff and where they might come into play and where some of those things might not be as important at the end as your perspective sort of grows as it seems right now. First map's only worth 5%, and that is so that you have a chance to kind of get your feet wet and see what it's all about, and I can give you some feedback. I've posted 2 examples, links to examples of mind maps. It's not the content, but just sort of how to create a map with you in the middle and then branch things off and, make connections. Maybe there's a connection between sexual assault and abortion, for example. So that's that. You can also just Google, as I said several times, personal mind map and click on the images in the Google search, and it'll give you all kinds of different images for how people have chosen to make maps. So you can use software like Prezi or Miro, or you can do it online. If you choose to do it on like Bristolboard or paper, you can just take pictures of that, and you'll be able to upload those photos so I can see it. Maybe you're somebody who doesn't want to do it on the computer. You prefer to take a more hands-on approach, and that's okay too. It's whatever you're comfortable with. The idea is that you're really going to look at your own beliefs and think critically about your biases and your beliefs, and also about the material you're learning, and see where there's room for your perspective to grow or evolve or change or maybe stay the same. But the idea is that you're going to look at your own learning journey, and that's the purpose of this map. See how you learn and how you take in information. That's going to serve you through the rest of your life, I would hope. So that's that part. If you have questions, you can send me an email. We can always meet in the Zoom room. For those of you that had trouble, I don't really know what to say except to call the tech people. There's kind of nothing that I can do. And for those of you who didn't get on, I originally thought that we would be recording these, but unfortunately we're not, because there's a ton of like rules and regulations and restrictions and a lot of business that goes along with recording. So instead, I'm going to upload a video like this every week, sort of talking about the material and what we covered in class. Won't cover, what we covered in class, because you'll miss out on discussion and things like that, but it will give you the gist of things. I always post my notes. The films are there for you to watch. So, hopefully these videos would help. That's what I would do in an online class that didn't have a sort of a live component or a Zoom component. So I'm going to give you the access to the notes here right away. So do the reading, watch the film, look at the notes, and then we're just going to move forward next week, starting with the section on, week 2, masculinity, femininity, and then what, that sort of section, because I don't want us to fall too far behind. And I have a feeling that in this class we are going to have some good group participation. So I always want there to be room for that, right? But I'll quickly go over a few things. You can read the notes. They talk a little bit about what women and gender studies is about as a discipline, about the link between women's and gender studies and feminism. Then there's a whole bunch of key dates that I've listed in one section of the notes. And I want to highlight some of them for you because they're significant both in terms of understanding how gender impacts how people live, but also race. And in particular, for this country and this province, it was 1918 when women in Canada won the right to vote federally. Provinces were different, but that was white women. It was not until the 60s that Indigenous people were able to vote. And if you think about what that means for how you participate in the world, it's huge. It wasn't until 1925 that women could divorce their husband on the grounds of adultery, and it wasn't until 1929 when the Persons Case happened, and that was when women became persons under the law. So the women involved were called the Famous Five. It was Emily Murphy, Nellie McClung, Mary Irene Parlby, Henrietta Muir Edwards, and Louisa McKinney, and they challenged the British North America Act, which at that point grouped women in the same category as lunatics and children. And they won. And so they went from being considered in the same category as children and lunatics to being considered full people under the law. And obviously, while not equal to men in all respects, they also won the right to sit in the Senate. So that's a big date. 1929 is when women in Canada became recognized as people under the law. Like, to not be considered people is, I imagine, for some of you, shocking. But lovely part of our history, and there's lots of, I love being Canadian, but there's a lot of part of our history that isn't great, and that's one of them. On your $10 bill, now you have a picture of Viola Desmond. And it was 1946 when she challenged the Canadian segregation laws in Nova Scotia by refusing to leave a white-only section of movie theater. She was prosecuted for tax evasion for refusing to leave that seat because there was a 1 cent difference between the seats she was supposed to sit in as a woman of color and where white people were allowed to sit. And in 2010, she finally received a pardon, and now she is the first Canadian-born woman to be featured on a banknote. That's your $10 bill. Let's see here. What else can I sort of highlight for you? Some of this you're going to get in the film, The Status Quo. They're going to talk about the Royal Commission on Women. Let's see. 1970 was when doctors finally became able to legally prescribe birth control. 73 was when crisis shelters opened, rape crisis shelters, and also domestic violence shelters. In 1976, the Status of Women was created, and that's the Department of the Federal Government, jeepers, that is dedicated to women's equality. But when Harper took power in 2006, he changed their mandate so that any agency that used equality in its mandate or advocacy would not be granted any funding. So it really changed sort of the nature of things. And he also closed several of the offices. So we have one here, but there's only 4 out of 20 remaining. In 1983 in Canada, it finally became illegal for a man to rape his wife. Prior to that, that was not a crime. What else can I sort of highlight for you here? In 1985, Section 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is the section that deals with equality, finally came into effect. Also in 1985, amendments were made to the Indian Act to reinstate the status of women that had previously lost status due to marrying a non-status Indian, and we're going to talk about that later in the course, what exactly that means. But the fight for the right for status rights for their descendants would continue all the way into 2017. 1988 was the year that the Supreme Court of Canada overturned Canada's abortion law on the grounds that it was unconstitutional and violates a woman's right to life, liberty, and security of their person. And that was under Section 15 that I just talked about of the Canadian Rights Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Prior to that, abortion was legal only in certain circumstances. A woman had to, sit in front of a panel of like 3 doctors who would determine if she actually should have an abortion, be allowed to have an abortion, if she was making a proper decision for herself, if she was of sound mind. There were quite a lot of hoops to jump through, and so 1988 was also known as the Morgentaler decision. And he eventually would receive the Order of Canada, huge honor, and several people who have received the Order of Canada gave theirs back because he received it, because they were so against the work that he did in both protesting the abortion laws that he felt violated women's rights, but also in providing abortions, even though at that time they were illegal. In 1993, Canada had its first and only female prime minister, and she was only prime minister for a very short time. But that was the year. It's the first and only time that Canada's seen a woman leader, female leader. And it was not until 2010 that Canada finally signed on to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So, a few dates that are sort of significant in terms of Canadian history. I think it's really easy for us to take for granted what it means to live in Canada and all the rights that we have, but some of those dates I think will surprise you. And certainly when I was learning about this stuff, thought like, my God, we weren't even considered persons under the law. How's that even possible? Then there's a little thing called Snapshot in your notes. It's called Snapshot from around the world. And so there's just a little bit more information kind of on like the state of things in the world, what things look like. So for example, under gender identity and sexuality, Canada was one of the several pioneer countries that recognized a third gender for the purposes of identity documents, such as passports. But in places like Pakistan, Yemen, Nigeria, Sudan, homosexuality is still a criminal act and subject to death. Poverty and race for the year 2016. 13% of families living below the poverty rate in the U.S. were headed by a male householder with no wife present, and 27%, so double, over double, were headed by a female head of household with no male, partner or husband being present. Countries where women are required to obey their husbands include places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Palestine, Qatar. In terms of violence, punishment for rape can be avoided if the rapist marries the victim in places like Palestine, Kuwait, Libya, Syria, Iraq. In 2014, Japanese police recorded just under 9,000 sexual violence offenses. In 2015, Canadian police recorded 27,000 sexual violence offenses. In New Zealand, out of 100 sexual assaults, 9 are reported to police. 3 of those will be prosecuted, and only 1 will result in conviction. So there's some more information there in that snapshot, but I just wanted to highlight a few things for you about what the state of things is in the world, because I think it's very easy to think that we've kind of nailed it. We've made it. Gender inequality is not such a big deal anymore. Women have it pretty good, and that why are women still always harping about this? Why are feminists still talking about this? Certainly we hear that from people like Donald Trump, right? And certain branches of the media who really make it seem like women are just continuing to complain despite the fact that we've made all these gains. And while we've made all these gains, in many places in the world, and even here, we're not, completely safe. We are not fully entitled to full autonomy the way that men are. People still comment on everything women do in a way that we don't do it with men. And to be clear, I don't want us to do it to men either. That's not, turning this inside out is not the answer. But I think it's important to look at what that means in terms of power and access to resources and access to institutional power and the ability to, navigate and walk in the world with various kinds of freedom. We're going to talk about all of those things kind of in depth throughout the course, but I really wanted to, hammer home some of those things because as we talked about in class, who you are, how you identify in terms of gender and sexuality and race and class background, right? Economics and geographical location, like demographics, where the area of a province or a city or the world that you grew up in, what your faith might happen to be, the situation with your family of origin. All of those things impact how you see the world around you, how you understand other people in the world around you and the issues that are happening in the world around you. And they also impact what you can do in the world around you in some measure, right? The freedom or lack thereof that you have to move through the world. Women tend to have a very different experience of navigating the public sphere than men do. And we will continue to talk about this, right? But I just wanted to point out a few of those things to sort of remind you that despite the gains, like, we have not nailed it. This is ground that is always being contested, and that we still need to be, conscious of the way that power is balanced, where it's concentrated in our institutions, in our governments. What do people in power look like? Do they look like you? Do they look like me? Is my voice being represented? Is yours? Our governments and our institutions caring about the things that are going to shape your life or shape mine? And what does it mean to look at the world through my eyes versus yours, right? Because my neighbor is not going to have the same experience that I have had. And while we have many things that tie us together, and even likely some experiences that will connect us, how we experience them will be different based on who we are. And I think it's easy for us sometimes to forget that privilege is a very real thing. People talk about white privilege and it gets tossed around, but I think often we don't take time to really understand what that means. And a lot of people that I have talked to, that I've taught, people in my life, as I said the other day, my brother-in-law and I've had this discussion about white privilege for a really long time. And it's just, in the last 6 months that he's kind of started to acknowledge that he has some white privilege. By nature of the fact that we're all in this classroom, this virtual classroom together, we have some privilege because many people in the world and even in our own communities don't have access to post-secondary education, right? So in some ways, that's already one layer of privilege, even though we might experience oppression and barriers, on another front. This is one area where we are all experiencing some degree of privilege. So those are the things I kind of really wanted to highlight for you, and ask you to kind of keep in the back of your mind as you do the readings and watch the film, and sort of start to think about what this course is going to look like, right? Things like Black Lives Matters. We talked about this a little bit in class the other day, but for, those of you who had trouble logging on or being able to hear what was happening, we are going to discuss what it means to say Black Lives versus All Lives Matter, and unpack a little bit what the difference is between those two things and who is saying them and what the intention is. We are going to look at what it means to be an Indigenous person in Canada, and in particular an Indigenous woman. And some of these conversations are going to be uncomfortable, and it's okay to be uncomfortable, but change doesn't happen unless people are willing to be uncomfortable, and hard truths are uncomfortable, and disrupting the status quo is uncomfortable, and asking people to acknowledge their privilege can be uncomfortable. Asking people to consider that, just because they've worked hard doesn't mean that they've had the same kind of barriers or obstacles to overcome as other people. But that acknowledging your privilege on one front doesn't mean that your accomplishments didn't require work. It takes nothing away from your achievements. But it does mean maybe that, for example, being white wasn't one of the barriers you faced. So we're going to go at this stuff critically. It's going to be a super interesting semester. I've heard from lots of you. You're excited. I'm excited. I am hopeful that we'll have some good discussion. So have a good weekend. Don't sweat this first map too much. You're going to get lots of feedback. Do a Google search for those images. Like I said, click the links that I posted so you can get a bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. The first map is going to be brief. It's just a quick little blah, blah. This is sort of what I think about this. Blah, blah. I don't know anything about abortion. To be honest, I haven't really thought about abortion. I know it's kind of a thing, so I'm really excited about learning more. Just to give me a bit of a snapshot of why you might include that. and what you think about it. Maybe you think sexual assault numbers are, overinflated and that it's not really a thing. Okay, well, it's helpful for me to know that as we are going to talk about those kinds of things, right? It's just a brief little glimpse for me inside your brain about how you see the world today before we get too far into the class. It's only worth 5%. Don't freak out. You're going to get some feedback. If you really bugger it up, typically I'll give somebody a chance to do it again. So, and again, you're welcome. I'm so nice, also funny. Good thing you're in my class. But don't sweat it. Just get something into me and think about it, like I said, in terms of giving me an idea of who you are. By you mapping out these 8 to 10 concepts, I'm getting a bit of a glimpse into how you see the world and what your beliefs are. That's what this is meant to do, this first map. It's also giving you a chance to chart out how you see the world today at the beginning of this course. And we're going to do that throughout the course. You'll be able to see as you move through the maps how your worldview changes or shifts or evolves. And that's the point. So have a super good weekend. Working on answering emails, so please don't freak out. I'm doing the best I can here with this back issue. I will see you next Monday. If you need anything, go ahead and get a hold of me. We can always make an appointment to chat inside the Zoom room. Okay? Talk to you soon.